Hey guys, Adam Lobo here from Adam Lobo TV, and as per your request, here's a video comparison between the Poco F3 against the Poco X3 GT to help you make a purchase decision. And I have to say that you will be surprised by some of the findings when I was comparing these two phones. So let's check it out. Now, starting from the hardware, in terms of the chipset, the Poco F3 comes with a Snapdragon 870 chipset, which is a 7nm processor, and the Poco X3 GT comes with a MediaTek Dimensity 1100 chipset, which is a 6nm processor, and yes, both phones are a 5G phone. Then when it comes to the phone's build quality, both phones were the same size from every dimensions, which was interesting because the Poco X3 has a larger battery, and in terms of the phone's weight, there are barely any difference. But since the front of the Poco X3 GT has a super strong Corning Gorilla Glass Victus protection, which I still think that it is crazy to have a phone within this price range to have that protection. And because of that Corning Gorilla Glass Victus protection, the screen is just a tad bit thicker, where the Poco F3 has a Corning Gorilla Glass 5 protection. Then at the back, the finish of the Poco X3 wasn't something that really stood out. Maybe just the amount of fingerprints, because yes, the rear of the phone is such a fingerprint magnet. Now, like I've said before, that I prefer how the Poco F3 looks at the back, color aside, because yes, I do love white color, but the matte finish definitely gave it a very unique look to the phone. And because of that, the Poco F3 does feel better in the hands, only because it had a better overall finish. In terms of the camera bump, both thickness are almost the same, but because the Poco F3 had a bit more rounded shape compared to a square shape on the Poco X3 GT, if you put the phone on a table or on a surface and type, you'll find the Poco X3 GT to be way more stable when it comes to typing it on a surface. In terms of the ports and buttons, looking down below, it was very similar, just that the Poco F3 has a dual SIM card slot over here compared to the placement of the Poco X3 GT, which is on the left side of the phone. And yes, both phones do not have micro SD card slots. On the right, you'll find the same placements of the volume rockers and the same tactile feel of the side power and fingerprint sensor, which I mentioned before that I still prefer this kind of buttons compared to the concave styles that you find on the Mi 10T Pro. So both unlocks really quickly and there was no difference over here. Then looking on top, since both phones has stereo speakers, you'll find the same additional speakers over here, just a little different arrangements for the speaker on the Poco F3, where the IR blaster on the Poco F3 is very close to the speakers, making it look like it was part of the speakers. So overall, if I really had to choose between both phones in terms of the design, build, and using the phone daily, I would go with the Poco F3. And that is also really because of the rear matte finish, but this could be going down to a personal preference. Now let's look at the display. As mentioned, since the both phones are the same size, it has a 6.6-inch display and the same resolution of 1080 by 2400 pixels. And according to paper, the Poco F3 is supposed to be 0.07-inch larger in terms of the screen, but trust me, you won't really see any difference when you put both phones side to side. Now, the Poco F3 has an AMOLED screen with a 120Hz refresh rate, and the Poco X3 GT has an IPS LCD display with the same high refresh rate. So with this, one would think that the Poco F3 would beat out the Poco X3 GT out flat. Well, yes, it does, but it only beats it barely, only with these three factors. Firstly, because of the peak brightness is at a massive 1300 nits compared to 450 nits on the Poco X3 GT, which I have to say that although it has 450 nits, but it was still very visible under bright sunlight. And the second factor is of course the deeper blacks and a slightly vibrant color that you would get on a higher quality AMOLED screen. And finally, the third would be the playback on Netflix on the Poco F3 was way better at Widevine L1 support that streams up to full HD compared to the SD playback resolution at Widevine L3 instead. And I'm suspecting this because the Poco F3 has HDR10 Plus compared to just HDR on the Poco X3 GT. Then when it comes to viewing the screen, the hole punch camera on both phones are the same size, but there is a silver line on the camera area on the Poco F3. Then the screen to body ratio between both phones were almost identical. And if you were to compare both phones side to side like what I've done, honestly you won't find an extremely huge quality difference when you put both phones side to side once again. And if you were to use both phones individually, I will guarantee that you will still love both phones equally when it comes to the screen quality. So once again, I have to give it to Poco F3 when it comes to the display performance, especially when I was using it daily and when it comes to media consumption. Next, onto the phone's cameras. The Poco F3's rear cameras comes with a 48 megapixel f1.8 aperture lens, an 8 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide angle lens, and a 5 megapixel f2.4 macro lens. Then as for the Poco X3 GT, it has a bigger 64 megapixel f1.8 aperture camera, the same 8 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide angle lens, and a lower 2 megapixel f2.4 macro lens. Then as for the front cameras, the Poco F3 has a bigger 20 megapixel f2.5 aperture and the Poco X3 GT has a 16 megapixel f2.5 aperture. So are the slightly bigger rear camera sensors on the Poco X3 GT a better choice? And is the Poco F3's bigger front megapixel camera better than the Poco X3 GT? Well, let's find out. Starting from the high megapixel mode, although on paper, the Poco X3 GT has a bigger megapixel count, as seen on these images, it looks practically identical, especially if you don't crop or zoom in that much. Looking at the main lenses, what's interesting is that the pictures do look very identical once again, with only the X3 GT photos being a tad bit brighter as seen at the Wisma M-First logo, but in terms of the dynamic range and the colors, it was very alike even when the photos were taken on the other side of the building or a totally different environment as well. The ultra-wide shots also looks very similar in terms of the colors and the dynamic range too, since it has the same megapixel count and the aperture value as well. But as seen in this second picture, there is some barrel distortion at the light post towards the left, where it almost had a fisheye effect over there. Then as for the portrait mode, firstly for objects, the Poco X3 GT had a better subject to background blur and edge detection as well. The pictures also seem sharper on the subject as seen in this second image. Then when it comes to taking portrait mode shots on humans, once again the Poco X3 GT does a way better job on the edge detection as seen just above my ears. My grey old man hair was blended into the background compared to how well the Poco X3 GT did. Hence, the Poco X3 GT does better in this particular portrait mode. Then looking at the macro shots, not only the Poco F3 could get even closer to the subject, but it also nails focus better than the Poco X3 GT, where there were times where the images were darker on the Poco X3 GT as well. So I would say that the Poco F3 was a clear winner in this macro mode category. Now as for the night mode, on the ultra-wide angle lens, while the balance of highlights and shadows were the same, but I like how the colors of the skies were on the Poco X3 GT as the skies were black, not in orange. Then as for the night main lens, it was equally as good for shots of some night lights. Both really didn't focus too well over here, but it did bring out the highlights and shadows decently. Next, for super low light situations, although the images on the Poco F3 was brighter, but I did not like how weirdly it was processed. There were patches of God knows what around the images as seen over here for the ultra wide shots, and while the main lenses did not have such issues, but I like how cleaner the images was on the Poco X3 GT. Now as for the regular selfie shots, here's where the clear winner has to be the Poco F3, not only because it had a bigger megapixel sensor, but the overall image processing was way better on the regular selfie, where the skin tones and the exposure was perfectly balanced. Then as for the portrait mode, the Poco F3 yet again does a really good job for the selfie shots, making it look very flagship material. Then as for video recording, both phones maximizes at 4K 30 frames per second for the rear cameras. The quality of the video was great and the image stabilization on the main lens was great too, with HDR turned off, but the Poco F3 handles exposure faster than the Poco X3 GT, where it does take a while for it to adjust the exposure value, and once it does, it looks very similar. Then the footage for the ultra-wide lens for both phones maxes out at 1080p, and like the video footage of the main lens, the video quality was great with the same exposure adjustments as well. As for the front video recording, both only records up to 1080p, where the Poco F3 goes up to 60 frames per second instead of only 30 frames per second on the Poco X3 GT. And while the image stabilization was equally as good, but what's interesting that this time around, the exposure adjustments were better on the Poco X3 GT, especially for backlit situations as seen over here. So guys, with this, since there is quite a difference in the camera performance for the front and the rear, each had its own strengths and weaknesses, which one would you guys choose? The Poco F3 or the Poco X3 GT? Do let me know down below. In terms of the audio quality, both sounded very similar again, with a nice amount of highs and mids. But because the Poco F3 had a bigger output volume of 98.1 dB compared to 96.1 dB on the Poco X3 GT, so if I really had to choose in terms of which I prefer in terms of the quality of the audio, because it was louder, I would obviously choose the Poco F3, but here is a quick sound test. Now, if you guys are enjoying this video comparison so far, a nice big thumbs up and a subscribe would be very much appreciated. Now, as for the battery specs, the Poco F3 comes with 4520 mAh of battery and the Poco X3 GT comes with a bigger 5000 mAh of battery. And based on my daily usage, here's where size does not matter, because the Poco F3 performed better a bit an hour more when it comes to the screen on time when I was at 10% battery. But where the Poco X3 GT wins is through its fast charging, where it supports up to a massive 67 watts compared to only 33 watts on the Poco F3. So yes, this does come down to a personal preference whether or not you prefer a better screen on time or a faster charging. So the current software version that I was at during this review for the Poco X3 GT is at 12.5.2, where the Poco F3 has the updated version of 12.5.3. Now, as mentioned in my full video review of the Poco X3 GT, I did not find any issues using the phone daily. Version 12.5.2 was better on the dark mode optimization, especially for apps like Facebook and YouTube Studio, which all have been fixed. However, the only thing that I hope that the upcoming version of 12.5.3 update for this particular Poco X3 GT phone is to have a better performance on the battery life, because it still drains pretty quickly when I'm at 40 to 30% battery, because other than that, I don't see any other issues at all. Because since the Poco F3 has the latest update of version 12.5.3, there was a tiny bit improvement on the battery life, not too much, but I did feel it compared to the last time that I used the phone daily. So yes, just like before, I still love the overall Poco skin compared to the Mi devices. So at this point of time, since the Poco F3 comes with a better battery life and the latest update, I would choose the Poco F3 over here. Now, as for gaming, as usual, I started out with Genshin Impact on the Poco F3, and with the new update, there was a tiny bit improvements on the temperature when I was playing games for quite a while. Then the battery drain was also better than the Poco X3 GT, where it had an average of 3% drainage at about 10 minutes of continuous gameplay, where as mentioned in my full video review of the Poco X3 GT, the battery drain was quite massive at 40% onwards. Then as for PUBG Mobile, there was no issues at all for both phones, as it performs the same since the game is very well optimized for smartphones within this range. So yes, if I had to choose which is better for gaming, I would go with the Poco F3 due to its brighter and a vivid screen, especially during gameplay. So in conclusion, it is pretty obvious that the Poco F3 reigns supreme over the Poco X3 GT, even with just 100 ringgit more, at a retail price of 1,699 compared to 1,599 ringgit for the 8GB of RAM with 256GB variant for the Poco X3 GT. I think that the 100 ringgit more is worth it because of its screen, the front cameras, and of course the current battery life that you get on the Poco F3. But with that being said, I wouldn't say that the Poco X3 GT was a total loser, because for some, it's still a rather great device that can be appealing, and like I said, that the whole screen on time issue could still be resolved with the 65-watt charging. So at the end of the day, it does come down to which are your priorities. Now, if you ask me which would I choose at this moment of time, since I don't cop out during my comparison video, I would totally go with the Poco F3, but who cares what I think? What is more important is what you guys think. So let me know which one that you guys would choose, the Poco F3 or the Poco X3 GT. Let me know at the comment section below. Aside from that, thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful in making your purchase decision. My name is Adam Lobo and I will catch you guys in my next video.